Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another exciting Unity tutorial with me, Fauzi. In this video, I'm going to explain how to create a navigation mesh but for 2D games using a plugin called Navmesh Plus, and you can download it for free from the GitHub. I will put the link in the description. And so this is basically what we've created here, the navigation mesh, and as you can see, it's on XY plane here. It's not on the XZ plane as normally with the navigation mesh setup. And here, if we run this, you see that we will have the enemy following the player. So let's just select the player, and I'm going to try to move the player. And there you go, we have a very nice agent following the player. So let's jump into the tutorial. But before we jump into the tutorials, if you want to learn how to create a game from scratch to a complete game, check out my online Unity courses. I've published a couple of courses covering best practices in game development with topics ranging from programming to visual tuning, desktop to a mobile platform, object-oriented programming, and many other useful tips. With the price of a takeaway, you'll get lifetime access to the course. Link in the description below. Okay, so now we need to install the Navmesh Plus from the GitHub. This is the page, and I'll put the link in the description. And you can just simply click the code button here and then download in a zip and just save it in your hard drive. And once you have saved it, you can open the zip file. I've already opened mine here, and as you can see, we have this folder here. We need to extract this folder into our project, so I'm going to open the project folder, and here I'm going to drag the folder from the zip into the project folder here. Okay, so now we have installed these add-ons for creating 2D Navmesh. Let's go back to Unity. So I've already prepared a couple of sprites sheet here, and I've downloaded from the itch.io here, and I will also put the link in the description. And now let's set up the scene using the sprite way. So in order to set up using the sprite way, first we need to create an empty game object, and I'm going to zero out the transform, and let's rename this to Navmesh 2D, and we can add the component Navmesh Surface 2D. So let's just add this component, and we will have this component once we install the Navmesh Plus add-ons. And here first we need to rotate the surface to XY. So just press this and you'll see that X rotation will turn to -90. And now we have this setup, we can start lay out the sprite. Okay, so let's just drag one of the tile here, and I'm going to change the type to tiled, and then drag this so it's tiled, and this is going to be the walkable area. And I'm going to add a box collider 2D, but later we are going to disable this or delete this. And the next thing that we want to create is the wall. So I'm going to drag this one here and set the order in layer to be greater than 0, so it gets rendered in front. And change the draw mode also to tiled, so we can expand this. And this would be the wall here. And we can duplicate this. And then we can also duplicate and then rotate this 90 degrees on the z-axis. Okay, we can just create a wall here, and let's move this one here. And we need to also add a box collider to this sprite here. So let's just add a box collider, and let's just adjust the box collider size so it fits with the wall. So I'm going to change this size here. And we need to also adjust the size of the ground sprite, so I'm going to change this also. Next thing that we need to do is we need to select all of the sprite here and make sure we drag this as a child of the Navmesh 2D object. Now once we've dragged this, we can just change the collect objects option and search from the children object. And we can just leave the include layers to everything, and use geometry. We can use the physics collider, and this is why we are adding the collider here. So this collider will be the measurement for creating the Navmesh walkable and non-walkable area. Okay, now we have this setup. For all of this sprite object, we need to add a Navmesh modifier. So let's add this and enable the override area. And we want to set the ground to a walkable area type, but the other wall here, we want to change this to a not walkable. So let's just set that. And we need to also change the agent size here under the navigations. I've already set mine to 0.2, but the default is 0.5. It's too large. It will create a very large gap between the wall and the walkable area. So I decreased the radius to 0.2. And now if we select the Navmesh 2D game object, we can start to bake, and it will create Navmesh area for the AI to move around. So this is how we set up the Navmesh area using the Sprite way. In this chapter, I'm going to show you how to set up the Navmesh area using a Tilemap. So here I'm going to open the Tilemap palette window here, and I'm going to dock this to the side here. And as you can see, I've already created a Tilemap, and there are a lot of resources on how to do this on the internet. You can search for yourself. And now let's create a tile map here. So I'm going to go to the 2D object and then pick tile map. And for the first tile map, I'm going to change this to ground. And I'm going to add another tile map. And I'm going to rename the second one to wall. Okay, with the ground selected, I'm going to pick one of the tile map here, and then I'm going to use this box paint with filled box option. And then I'm going to drag this so it's larger than the camera. And we can create variation by using the draw here. So let's just create variation. Okay, and now we can select the wall, and then we can also draw the wall here. So let's just draw wall area here, and a smaller one over here, and we can just create a corner here. Okay, so now we have created the wall. For the ground, we need to add the Navmesh modifier here and pick the override area to walkable. And for the wall, we want to also add a Navmesh modifier, enable the override area, and then set this to not walkable. And then we need to also create an empty game object for the Navmesh 2D. So we can just reset the transform and then rename this to Navmesh 2D. And I'm going to add the Navmesh surface 2D component. And as always, we need to rotate the surface to XY. So I'm going to rotate by clicking this button here. It will automatically rotate it. And now we don't need to change the collect objects. We can just pick the all, and it will automatically grab this grid component here. And we can just use the render meshes. So let's just try to bake. And as you can see now, we have this navigation mesh. And there is an issue here. So we can just enable the override by grid and then compress bound, and then we can clear it and then try to bake this again, and it will bake correctly now. Okay, so this is how we set up using the tile map. And now let's set up the agent. And here, if we go to the Navmesh Plus folder, you see that we have a guide. I'm going to open this guide here, and as you can see, there are quite complete guide over here if you need to check it out. But there is one point that we need to take care whenever we setting up the agent here. And as you can see here in this page here, you can see that we need to disable the update rotation on the agent and also disable the update up axis. So make sure whether we are using the C# script or Playmaker or Bolt, we need to disable two of these properties on start. And since we are using the standard navigation mesh from Unity, the setup is pretty much the same as the 3D version, but we are using this Navmesh Plus to convert the navigation mesh space on the XZ plane to the XY plane. So I'm going to go to the Sprites folder, and then I'm going to drag the enemy here and also the player. And let's just rename this. Okay, so for the enemy, I'm going to add a navigation mesh agent component. And once we created the enemy and player, don't forget to set the player tag to player, so the enemy agent can grab the tag or the transform on runtime. Okay, so now let's set up the agent using a script. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call this script. And I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this agent script. Let's open this. And here inside the script, we need to define the target for testing this out. So let's just create a new transform field, and let's just call this target. I've marked this serialized field so we can access this on the inspector. And we need to also have a reference to the Navmesh agent. And in order to have reference to this class here, we need to import the AI namespace. So I'm going to import the AI namespace here above by typing using Unity engine.ai. And here we can just define the Navmesh agent, and then we can just call this agent. And on start, we want to cache the component, so we can just use the get component method, and then pass the class here. And then on the next line, we want to disable the update rotation properties to false, and also set the update up axis to also false. And for testing this out, we can just set the position or the destination using the set destination from the agent object, and then we can grab the target position. If we want to spawn the enemy on runtime, then we need to grab the target by using its tag. So let's just override the target here. We can grab it using the game object class, and then using define game object with tag method, and then pass the tag name, which is player, and then get the transform. Now let's go back to Unity and set up the agent. And I'm going to also add the agent script that we've just created, and we can just drag the player game object to this transform slot here. And I'm going to set the ground order layer to -1, so the wall gets rendered on top of the ground. I'm going to select the player, press play, and let's switch back to scene view quickly here. Let's move the player. And if we move the player, as you can see, the enemy is moving and it avoids the wall, and it keeps following here. So it has avoidance, and it can avoid a wall if there. And it will always try to search for the shortest path. And now let's implement the Navmesh agent using Playmaker. But before that, make sure that we have import the navigation mesh or the pathfinding package from the ecosystem. So if we go to the ecosystem browser, you can just search for the pathfinding, and once the result shown here, you can just download it or import it. I've already downloaded, so I don't need to do that anymore. And now with the enemy game object selected, we need to add the Navmesh agent. I've already added the Navmesh agent here. And let's create a new FSM here. So on start, we want to disable the update rotation. So we can use the set agent update rotation, and then set this to false. And we want to also disable the update up axis based on the documentation here, as you can see. So I'm going to drag the Navmesh agent component into this state, and then use the set properties because we don't have the actions for it. So we can just use set property, and then under the properties we can search for the update up axis, and then for the set value we can just uncheck this, so the update up axis value is false. And now we have initialized these two properties. I'm going to add a finish transition, and we can go to the next state here. Another thing that I want to do is here on the first state, I'm going to grab a game object. So we can just use game object find. I think we have game object find. Yeah, we have game object find. And then we can search using the tag and store the game object to a new variable. You can just call this player. And here on the second state, we can use the get position action to get the position of the player. So we can just specify game object and then use variable player. And we want to save the position into a new vector. So let's just call this player position, and then enable every frame option, so it will get the player position every frame. And then we want to use the set destination action, set agent destination action. So let's just pick this action, and then for the destination we can just set using the variable and then pick the player position. And this is basically will stop the action once we arrive to the destination. So if we want to keep chasing the player, we need to add a finish transition and then connect the finish transition to this state. And on the path pending done event, we can just pick the finish transition. Let's save the scene. And now I'm going to select the player and press play to test this. And as you can see, the enemy is chasing the player, and if we move this player around, it will try to chase the player, but it will avoid a wall here, and it will try to search for the shortest path. Okay, so this is how we set up the agent using Playmaker. And in this chapter, I'm going to show you how to create the agent using Bolt. Here under the assets folder, I'm going to create a new folder called flow, and then under the enemy game object with the Navmesh agent component attached to it, I'm going to add a new flow machine. And here I'm going to create a new macro and save it under the 2D Navmesh folder under the flow folder, and I'm going to call this 2D agent. And now we have the start and update event. First, on start, we want to disable the update rotation. So let's just search for the agent. And here, if we scroll down below, you will see that we have this Navmesh update rotation properties, and we can just uncheck this, so it will set the update rotation to false. And then I'm going to search for the update up axis. And here, as you can see, we have this Navmesh agent.update up axis, and I'm going to set this also value to false. And here I'm going to add a object variables. So let's just give it a name of player, and for the type I'm going to set this to transform. So we can just search for transform, and here basically we want to get the player using the tag. So we can just on start, we can just search for find object with tag, and I'm going to use the game object find game object with tag unit. And for the tag, we can just search for player, and then we want to set the player variable value to this game object here. So I'm going to add a set variable action or unit set object variable, and we can connect this here. And for the variable, we can pick player, and let's change this to transform because somehow it doesn't get updated here. And we can just connect the result game object here to this new value here on the set variable. So I'm going to set this here. Okay, so now we have set up the start event on the flow graph. And now to move the agent under the update, first we want to get the position from the player game object here. So let's just change this back to transform. I don't know why it gets reset. So I'm going to pick transform here, and I'm going to drag the player. And now we have get the player transform. We want to expose the position. So I'm going to search for position here by dragging the green points here, and then we can scroll down, and as you can see here, we will have transform.position get. So we want to use this, and from the update event, we want to use the set destination unit. So let's just pick Navmesh agent.set destination, and then for the target, we can just feed this transform here. So now we have this setup. Let's save this, and now we can select the player, and let's give it a try. Let's go back to the scene view here, and let's move the player. And now, as you can see, we have the enemy following the player using Bolt, and it will try to avoid the walls and try to get the shortest path, as you can see here. So there you go, how to create a Navmesh agent for 2D games. And if you like this tutorial, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more Unity tutorials with C#, Playmaker and Bolt. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next video.